Another edition, the first March Madness edition of the year of Beat the Closing Number, presented by thelines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich. We'll be breaking down Final Four odds, first four odds, first round odds, and our penciled in national championship picks, not necessarily bets, here on Beat the Closing Number. Again, Eli Hershkovich now joined by Matthew Winick, guest co-host on the show. You can follow him on X at Matthew Winick. He's going to be a part of Jordan Majeski's March Madness handicap and a part of Jordan Majeski's site. We're both good friends with Jordan, but it is the first time, Matt, we are going face-to-face here. So we've known each other for a while, but happy to have you on, man.
Hey, pleasure being on. And, it's the best time of year to talk college hoops, which I like doing every day anyways, so might as well get after it today.
And let's tip it off. So we're recording this just for a disclaimer on Sunday night. We're getting set for some early first four and first round picks. So if the odds that you see on the screen, if they move, if the odds that we're discussing move, keep that in mind. These are as of Sunday night, Selection Sunday, about 4 or 5 hours after Selection Sunday on March 16th. So, Matt, let's get started with injuries quickly off the top before we get into our first four and first round initial bets. Big ones of note: Cooper Flagg, Keyshawn Gilbert, Juwan Roberts, Chance McMillan, Darian Williams, Tyrese Hunter, Mark Mitchell, Renee Smith, and Magoon Gwath of San Diego State. I would say off the top of my head, quick math, about 30-40% of those guys are questionable, so the majority are going to play or seemingly are going to play early on in the tournament. Malik Brown, also a player that we touched on off air before we got started. Duke's arguably their best and most impactful defensive player at the four position off the bench may or may not be back until the Sweet 16. But of those names, I mean, obviously Cooper Flagg being one, but any angles off the top that are of note to you and maybe should be worth noting for our audience here?
Yeah, I think, especially kicking off on Tuesday with North Carolina, San Diego State, if Magoon Gwath doesn't play for San Diego State, that changes their defense entirely. It's interesting because he's their tallest starter at 7 foot, but he's not their center. He's their power forward, and he's super quick and really great with his footwork defensively, which allows him to play on the weak side when it comes to blocking shots. You think of a shot blocker, you think he's standing super tall right underneath the rim. Just Magoon Gwath will guard Jalen Withers at the 4, who's been starting for the Tar Heels lately, and he'll be able to recover to drivers and block those shots for the small North Carolina guards if they don't know that he's there because he's coming from the weak side. If he's not playing, that changes entirely because now San Diego State's either playing two true bigs or they're going small, which is probably more likely against a smaller North Carolina team, and they just don't have that rim protection anymore. So in a situation where North Carolina, who's been shooting the 3 really well, and San Diego State might have to over leverage on that sort of realm, if they don't have Gwath's rim protection, I think that defensively it changes everything.
Yeah, definitely worth noting. Out in the quarterfinal of the Mountain West tournament, and that was San Diego State's lone game in that tournament, losing to Boise State in the first round. So about a differential of 9.5 points per 100 possessions with Gwath off the floor. And you go back to the Boise State game, Broncos, Matt, took a program record, or tied for a program record, 43s, and you kind of alluded to it, North Carolina, over their before the Duke game, so from February 15th through the quarterfinal matchup against Wake Forest, shooting 44.6% from 3, 31.9% their opponents were shooting from 3, so a pretty good net 3-point clip. You could argue maybe a little bit of variance in store, but it's a good matchup for them, and you could also argue North Carolina shouldn't be in the tournament considering their at-large resume, but pretty good non-conference strength of schedule despite the fact that they only had that one notable quad one win over UCLA. But against a hybrid pack line defense that Dutcher runs, if Gwath doesn't play and UNC is on from 3, Tar Heels, by the way, consensus line as we're recording this, -3.5, and -182 is the best price you're going to find on the money line over at FanDuel. Be sure to price shop the best odds over at thelines.com. I would say advantage UNC, at least to win the game outright.
Definitely, and that is almost 2 points off of Ken Palm's 2 point North Carolina advantage. So you can see the market is definitely leaning towards North Carolina. I'm not sure if that's the name. I'm not sure if that's no Guath. I'm not sure if we're smart enough at that point in this market volatility, but it's interesting to see where that line might go if that news sort of becomes more concrete moving forward.
If you want to make first 4 picks, first round picks, head over to the play.thelines.com, also thelines.com for the best March Madness promos. But over at play.thelines.com, you can predict the final 6 teams in the field, and you'll be entered to win a $1,000 prize if you pick all of them correctly. So be sure to head over to play.thelines.com to enroll in that free contest. Let's head over, Justin, to the other first 4 game, at least of the high major level. Wednesday night, Dayton, both 11 seeds. 11 seed Xavier against 11 seed Texas. Consensus line of Musketeers -2.5. Xavier -130, or actually -145. It looks like it's up to you on the money line. It's the best price you're going to get over at Caesars Sportsbook. Musketeers lost their first round game in the Big East tournament, up as many as 14 points in the second half against Marquette. Texas advancing all the way to the quarterfinals against Tennessee. They didn't cover that 9.5-point line. Did you have any action on that where Tennessee winds up back?
I was on Texas.
How big of a sweat for you was that? I know we want to maybe touch on the importance of responsible gambling. I think that was an important game to note of, just from the standpoint of not chasing if you lost that bet. I'm not saying you would, but for the novice bettor.
I have made over 1,600 college basketball bets this season. We talked about this pre-show. I would be lying if I said that was the first or 10th time that's happened to me this year. It happens. It goes both ways, even though it feels like it only ever goes one way. It goes both ways. I promise you, if you were really upset from that loss, to anyone listening, you're going to get it back the other way at some point if you keep on doing it.
Right. If you're making enough bets, and that's not saying you should play a ton of bets at high volume if you're just getting started at this, but variance typically water meets its level when it comes to positive and negative variance. But like I mentioned with the Xavier Musketeers, as we look at the Midwest region where Houston is the number 1 seed in that particular region, Xavier favored. And if we go back to pre-NCAA tournament before this game, Xavier has won 9 of their last 12 games, including the Marquette loss. They've ranked 26th on Torvik during that span. So this is where I kind of look at Texas and their success in Nashville. And that isn't to say that the Longhorns didn't play well, because this was about the first time all year. I think the 5th time all season they've had a full complement of their starting lineup and rotation that they expected to go into the season with. So it's not like maybe Texas hasn't started to peak, but you also can't have tunnel vision, right? When it comes to looking at conference tournament results. Texas winning a couple of games, maybe a little bit of a luck box win in double overtime over Texas A&M as a 5.5, 6-point dog on the pre-flop line, while Xavier loses in the first round of the Big East tournament, and they're arguably peaking with that new look roster preseason-wise, and Zach Fremantle a little bit into Big East play, especially during this last 12-game stretch. With Fremantle healthy, they're starting to play their best basketball. So just the dichotomy of that, and kind of starting off the handicap, you can't really be like, okay, Texas has won 2 of their last 3 games. They look great in the SEC tournament. Xavier didn't cover, or actually covered, backdoored if you had 2.5. I was lucky that Ryan Conwell hit that shot off glass.
Of course, I was there.
You were there. You were watching it in person. Did you have Xavier?
No, I had nothing. I had the under, which lost pretty badly. I think, although the guy right in front of me in the stadium did have St. John's, and he walked out immediately after the shot went in. He didn't say a word to any of his friends. He left the stadium.
That's probably a guy that is making or maybe chasing early in the Big East tournament. But would you agree with that notion? We can't have tunnel vision when it comes to conference tournament results. And before I get into my deeper handicap of this game with the individual matchup, just because Xavier lost in the first round doesn't mean that you should be running to the window and backing Texas as a dog yet again.
For sure. I mean, you can go both ways. On one hand, you don't want to overreact. On the other hand, you don't want to underreact. I mean,
True.
Xavier didn't play poorly. Let's just say that they took St. John's to the final couple possessions and they led that game for a large majority of the game,
You
especially
mean
in the first
Marquette,
half.
right?
Pardon?
You mean
Sorry, I meant Marquette.
yeah,
St. John's and the tournament kind of got me. I watched both
back to
games. So
back. They were playing
my
back to
games
back.
got my games got jumbled. But point being, Xavier, I mean, they were in that game the entire way through. Marquette had an awesome shooting performance at 43% from deep. So it's not like Xavier played extremely poorly. In fact, they were awesome offensively. And when you talk about tunnel vision, I think that when you're looking at Texas, it's something where like it's bounces, right? Xavier's a possession away from Marquette, and then Texas A&M went to double overtime, right? So bounce one way, bounce the other way. Now Texas ends up losing in the second round of the SEC tournament, and who knows where Xavier gets to in their Big East run. So it's coin flips, it's results. Win loss don't always mean results in terms of actually how a team performed, and it's easy. Sometimes you just wipe that off the board.
Yeah, great points there. So for me, I haven't placed a bet on Xavier. I kind of want to see how the market fluctuates. Maybe I should have already with the market bumping this one up to minus 145 on the money line, but I'll likely have a play on X on the money line. Viewers, listeners who have been watching the show, listening to the show in recent weeks know how high I am on this Musketeers team, considering their recent play. And like I touched on, they've been peaking ever since late January, actually ever since the loss to St. John's in overtime, where they were up double digits in the second half of that one. But Texas's defense ranks in the 29th and 13th percentile when you look at how they guard on off-ball action and cuts on a points per possession basis, according to Synergy. We know Shaw Miller runs a motion offense with Ryan Conwell, Zach Freemantle. So a lot of that is predicated off-ball movement and cuts. I think Xavier should have success in the half court, despite the fact that Texas's transition defense actually grades out pretty well, according to Synergy, which Xavier does like to get their buckets in transition. But yeah, Xavier's half court offense, I think, has success. And then Ryan Conwell and the Xavier offense, top 60 in free throw attempt rate. Across the season, Texas ranks bottom 45 nationally when you look at trying to limit opponents getting to the free throw line. And then one last point before I swing it to you, Matt. At the other end of the court, Dalen Swain, who's Xavier's Swiss Army knife, 6'8" wing, arguably maybe a second, maybe back-end first-round pick if he goes into the draft this year, although he had a late-season injury that maybe cost his draft status and draft stock a bit. But I think he's able to hold Trey Johnson in check, just considering his length, athleticism, and size. Trey Johnson, an eventual first-round pick, one and done for the Longhorns. So needless to say, I like Xavier in this game, just haven't played it yet. Be sure to check out our Discord channel. Link is over at thelines.com in the top right-hand corner for all of our best bets from our staff. But any bets, any leans from you here, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, quick shout out to last year's Indiana State squad, because they have 3 of the 5 starters playing in this game between Conwell, as you mentioned, and then Julian Larry and Jason Kent for Texas. And that was one of my favorite teams ever. So shout out to that squad.
A little emotional, I'm sure, for all 3 players.
Oh yeah, they're gonna see each other, think they should have been here together in the tournament last year when they got snubbed for Indiana State, and then they went to the NIT final. Regardless, a quick stat for you: Texas plays at least a form of drop coverage, with Caden Shedrick being an elite rim protector. Xavier played 10 drop coverage opponents in Big East play, and they scored over 1.1 points per possession in 9 of them. I've been tracking this all season long. They murdered drop coverage in the Big East, which is known for it, between Providence and Butler and UConn and Creighton, of course. And they struggled with more aggressive schemes like St. John's and Marquette, where they had to swing, shoot a ton of threes, which isn't their biggest strength. They're going to be able to dribble penetrate against this Texas team, and they're going to be able to, like you said, find off-ball cutters in Sean Miller's motion offense. I think and then the free throw line, they're going to score here. The question is Trey Johnson going to have a 35-point game, but is he going to get that through the mid-range? Is it going to take him 22 shots? Is it going to be efficient? Are there going to be other players for Texas contributing? Is Jordan Pope going to show up, because he's super hit or miss? And I think that there's way fewer questions when it comes to what Xavier is going to do than what Texas is going to do. So I would lean with you on the Xavier side.
All right. Good handicap there. Let's take a look at a first round game on Thursday. East Region, second game in Denver. 6 seed BYU against number 11 VCU. Pulling up the latest odds quickly as we record here on about 3 days or so in advance of this game. Looking at the latest odds on Thursday afternoon. BYU a juiced 2.5-point favorite. Actually, the best odds you can find on the Cougars. -2.5, -110 over at Caesars, -150 on the money line. So similar to Xavier, the best odds available over at Caesars Sportsbook. Total for this game, 143.5. I'll likely have a play on VCU. I don't think yet. It doesn't look like there are any threes left. I was hoping to pull the trigger on a Rams +3, which was available as of about 30 minutes to an hour ago. So I missed the boat on VCU getting a full possession. But you look at this VCU defense, it's not Shaka Havoc, but they pressure the ball pretty well. They're forcing the 31st highest opponent's turnover rate, according to KenPom. BYU ranks 207th nationally when it comes to taking care of the ball, or a lack thereof, of limiting their own turnovers. And as good as this BYU offense can be with point forward Yegor Demon, and we saw BYU go into Arizona, maybe a lucky win considering the officiating down the stretch, but they have some pretty good Big 12 wins. But they allow the 15th highest three-point scoring rate, and VCU's three-point shooting actually saw a good amount of three-point regression in A-10 play. And you look at the way they could space the floor with Shulga, Jack Clark, who I love coming over from Clemson, played pretty well too in the A-10 title game against George Mason, locking up the VCU bid on Sunday afternoon. Philip Russell, 2 of 3 of those guys are actually transfers, and they can all space the floor despite the fact that they shot 32% from deep as a team against George Mason in the aforementioned A-10 title game. So no bet for me yet, but I'm looking at a pretty strong lean and a likely bet on VCU +2.5.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting one. VCU, one of their biggest strengths in the Atlantic 10 is that they have the size, the physicality, really the overall makeup of a power conference team, right? They have a lot of former power conference players. And outside of Philip Russell, who's one of the smaller point guards that play big minutes in college basketball, they have size across the board. They're 58th nationally in height. And BYU, I mean, they see this day in, day out with the Big 12, right? So this is really, in a way, a Big 12 game. Let's not get this mistaken. VCU could hang in the Big 12. They're definitely in a middle of the pack team at minimum in that league.
Would you consider them a Houston light? Like a very light?
Offensively, yes. Defensively, they play really differently, but
true.
Yes, in the way that they're both quite physical. But I'd say a big difference here, and what I was going to touch on is, I mean, there's a ton of three-pointers for VCU, and you mentioned that regression, but they don't really have a ton of backup plans. Like Jack Clark is their four-man, and he's more of a three-point shooter than anything. Their two bigs, Furman and Bamgoye, are not post-up players. Like BYU's Keba Keita and Fusini Traore both bang in the post, and VCU's guys are more rim runners and rim protectors. And if VCU is ice cold, like BYU is going to give up a ton of three-point looks, and in some ways deliberately, they're going to try to make non-elite three-point shooters take those shots. They'll try to press up on Shulga. If VCU isn't hitting those three-pointers, which they do have a tendency to do, then that's an issue. Like defensively, they'll be fine against BYU, but what's the backup plan if the shot's not falling, to the point where there's probably a decent live angle here if VCU gets red hot or if VCU gets ice cold. Either way, both teams are top 50 in three-point rates. So hot or cold runs are going to happen in this one, and you'll see some up and down.
Would that make you inclined, and it's making me inclined, to maybe look at a live over if we get a slow start in this one? With the three-point variance in mind.
It's perhaps even the other way, a live under if teams get red hot, because statistically, these are not two of the greatest three-point shooting teams in the country. I mean, BYU at 33%, but a lot of that comes in their home gym where they're I don't have the exact numbers on me, but they're a lot better at shooting in their home gym. And VCU is one of the best catch-and-shoot denial teams in the country. So BYU is going to have to take a lot of those shots off the dribble unless they get a ton of second offensive rebound looks. Either way, I'm thinking hot and cold streaks are bound to happen with the three-point shooting here.
It's a good point. Let's move over to a little bit later on Thursday night in the West region. Number 6, or the 6 seed Missouri in that region, taking on the number 11 seed, the Drake Bulldogs, after winning Arch Madness. So they've had some time off entering this matchup. Maybe that's a part of your handicap here, but I know this is a game you're interested in discussing. Best price you're going to see on the board, at least as of Sunday night, Missouri -6.5, -105 over at BetMGM. Total pretty much a consensus of 133.5. An injury that we touched on off the top, Mark Mitchell, didn't play in Missouri's quarterfinal matchup of the SEC tournament. We talked about this off air. Likely would have played if it was an NCAA tournament game, so the line kind of reflects Mitchell being in. How do you handicap this one?
Yeah, Drake is a super unique team where they brought in, of course, Ben McCollum from Division II, and they run one of the most distinct styles in the country. They're last nationally in possession, in pace by a very wide margin. Their games average 58.8 possessions per game. There's no other team under 60, and it's not even particularly close. They run ball screen after ball screen after ball screen with Bennett Sturts up top, who's become an NBA draft prospect out of being a Division II player. And they'll do a lot of pick and roll with their big men, try to get the big men in some action. But Missouri is going to be ultra aggressive on every single ball screen. And this is the only way Drake knows how to run their offense. Bennett Sturts is going to see elite perimeter defender Anthony Robinson. And if it's not Robinson, it's going to be Tony Perkins, who's even bigger and more physical. And then he's going to get that big man, and Dennis Gates is going to rotate guy after guy after guy to get after him. And Drake has no bench. Brennan Sturts plays every single minute of every single game. He's going to get exhausted. Drake is an elite offensive rebounding team, and they'll get their second chances here. But if we're talking about shot volume, Missouri is number 2 in the entire country in free throw rate, and Drake finished bottom 3 in the Missouri Valley in free throws allowed. Missouri is going to live at the free throw line. And Drake's main source of offense is going to be doubled and beaten down constantly. Obviously, Drake slowing this down will make Missouri a little challenge in the half court. They'll need Caleb Grill, who's been a sharpshooter all season, to really hit some threes here. But it's just Drake's going to be taken out of their plan. And not to mention with those free throws, if they play 7 guys and 2 of them play the entire game, if Sturts picks up 2 quick fouls, then what? What happens?
I know this isn't the Tucker DeVries Drake team, but this will be the 3rd straight year where Drake doesn't win a first-round game. Now, I hope, well, if you end up tailing Matt, I hope it's not the opposite where Drake isn't covering for 99% of the game, and then they wind up covering and winning the game against Missouri. But I'm with you. Stylistically, this is a bad matchup for Drake, despite the fact that they have the rest advantage. Like you said, Missouri should live at the free throw line. They have the size advantage. They're not a great defensive rebounding team, 300th nationally in terms of the defensive rebounding rate. So like you said, Drake, despite the size disparity, should be able to get some of those second chance opportunities. But they rate 279th in turnover rate. Missouri and their ball pressure with Robinson, Tamar Bates too, who has really transformed at his game after transferring over from Indiana. If they turn Drake over, and Drake doesn't have the offense to come back in this game too. If Missouri gets off to a hot start, like you look at this and it's apples and oranges. If we go all the way back to when Virginia got upset in the first round, but Virginia did not have the offense to come back in that game because of the tempo that they play at and the type of offense they run. Drake dead last in tempo. How are you going to come back if Mizzou is turning you over in the half court? So how are you going to create offense? But if Mizzou is running and gunning and controlling the pace, Drake can't come back in this game.
Yeah.
All right. So we're on the same page with Missouri and Drake, at least in regards to Missouri advancing. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to pull the trigger on the Tigers, but I do like your luck and handicap for this matchup. Let's move on to one of the last games on Thursday night, which is typically when upsets happen, right? In the NCAA tournament. And I know, or at least that's maybe my intuition for this game. And I know it's the upset pick, or one of the upset darling picks that you heard, the listener viewer, on Selection Sunday. But Michigan against UC San Diego. I'm not one to, and I know Matt isn't either, to tout the typical 5-12 upset pick. But this one not only screams upset, but when you handicap it, it definitely does. Michigan in high altitude in Denver, coming off 3 games in 3 days. Now, quick turnaround against a UC San Diego team that, for my money, is the best mid-major in the NCAA tournament, and the market certainly thinks so, or at least maybe a little bit of a fade on Michigan too. With this line sitting at consensus 2.5, quick total for you 141.5 looks like that's the consensus, and best price you're going to find on UC San Diego on the money line plus 130 at Caesars. Best number on Michigan to win the game outright minus 150 over at Bet365. So I have a bet on this one. You can find it in our Discord channel. I quickly pulled the trigger, Matt, on the Tritons plus 3.5. So this UC San Diego defense, when you think about mid-majors, granted, Drake is in the similar line of thought here, but a top 30 adjusted defensive efficiency, actually 30th to be exact in that department. And Michigan has outperformed its expectation by a mile. When you look at 12 wins by 4 points or fewer, they could easily be under 500 in the Big Ten, at least in regards to the regular season, and they certainly finished the regular season in that line of thought. And maybe 3 luck box wins, or at least the latter 2 lucky wins in the Big Ten tournament. And per shot quality, they're outperforming their record by 6 wins. So that's equivalent to the 11th most record luck across Division I. Turnovers, a big problem for this Wolverines team. They're 328th in that department, a big part of our handicap so far through all the games we've discussed here on the podcast for the most part. UC San Diego turning opponents over at the second highest clip nationally. Aniwaniwa. I got to make sure I... Aniwaniwa. It's 3 syllables, so you just got to... I got to say it slowly so I don't stumble over myself. Tate Jones, one of the best mid-major players in college basketball. If UC San Diego's defense can speed up Michigan's offense, turn them over, which they, on paper, should be able to do, score on Michigan's drop coverage, which they have the floor spacing to do, top 60 in three-point efficiency across college basketball. I think this is the upset in the first round. Now, I took the points, but I'll probably sprinkle a little bit on the money line. What say you here, Matt?
Yeah, I first of all, I will say, I not to fully plug myself, but I did put out a live bracket breakdown thread. Basically, I was at my computer when they announced the bracket. I just immediately wrote down my thoughts, no filter, no editing, just wrote them down. And the very first thought I had in the very first bracket was, and I'll read it verbatim: "Oh boy, UC San Diego is going to beat Michigan, aren't they?" It's the first thing I said. It just made too much sense.
Yeah.
The turnover is the main thing, and when I think of Michigan and turnovers, the very first thing that comes to my mind is when they played Purdue on a national Friday night game back in January, and they had 22 turnovers.
I was at that game.
Okay, so then you remember it too. Michigan turned it over like wildfire, and it just led to breakaway bucket for Purdue. It was a 30-point game, and the game is over. I will say this: UC San Diego will double the post at every opportunity possible, which is going to happen a lot because Vlad Golden's a heavy post-up player, which means that Michigan will get a ton of open threes. And the reason they just won the Big Ten tournament is because they went 31. I mean, they didn't even shoot well in the game against Wisconsin, but 39% against Maryland is really what got them out of that game and really what was a tight back and forth battle.
And they weren't shooting well entering the Big Ten tournament.
That's exactly there. They were not shooting well at all. Before the tournament, 13%, 35, 22, 23, 18, 24. They hadn't topped 40% since January before they almost got there against Maryland. So this is the point. If Trey Donaldson's hitting clutch threes, if any of Roddy Gale, who's been under 20% this year, Roddy Gale, LJ Kayson, Will Cheddar, Namari Burnett, if they're hitting threes, then Michigan's going to win this game because they're going to get open ones, because UC San Diego will not let Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf beat them on the inside. But if those are falling, this is the battle that UC San Diego sort of played all year, and the numbers work in their favor, but numbers only work to a certain extent. So I'm close to locking in UC San Diego. Obviously, you're losing value every minute that you don't because everyone's on UC San Diego for rightful reasons. But what might end up making more sense is if Michigan starts off red hot, that could be a lot of opportunity as well.
Well, I'll probably add on to my UC San Diego pick in that case. But no, that's a good point. To your point though about trapping the post, that generally does lead to Michigan turning the ball over.
That's
So
it.
stylistically, I think this is a really good matchup, and we also both touched on this. It's going to be a consensus upset pick in a lot of people's brackets, but
Yeah.
for those looking to play the contrarian role in this game, a game, and it's stylistically very different. But you go back to the last NCAA tournament last year with Wisconsin James Madison. Now, I will say the caveat to that is I thought AJ Storr quit from the opening tip of that game. But I think it was obvious when you were watching it. I think he was ready to go to Kansas.
Or early.
Yeah, exactly. After having a really good Big Ten tournament, mind you,
Yeah.
losing now back-to-back Big Ten championship games if you're Wisconsin. But everyone was on James Madison. And I was actually high on Wisconsin going into the tournament, so I got shoved out of my face. But you don't have to always play contrarian. Like if you agree with Matt's points, for sure. Maybe you look at Michigan Live, if UC San Diego, for that matter, starts off hot. But you don't always have to go the other way just because it's a consensus upset.
For sure.
All right, let's keep it moving here to Friday. So to clarify for the listeners and viewers, you're likely going to play UC San Diego, or are you going to maybe wait for the live angle?
I will, at minimum, I will put some money line on them, at least to match the unit size to get a unit back. Because I think that that's probably I mean, obviously there's not a ton of value on the money line compared to the spread at 2.5, but I think that's probably where I lean. With that said, I'm curious to see if it moves in any capacity, if there's any contrary to the movement that's going towards UC San Diego.
We saw a little bit of pushback earlier, like late Sunday night, not as late as we're recording. It's about 10:19 for me Central, so 11:19 for you on the East Coast, Matt. But around 8 o'clock, we did see some Michigan -3.5 start to pop, at least at FanDuel. So juiced in UC San Diego's direction. But there was a little bit of pushback. Now we're sitting at a consensus 2.5, juiced in Michigan's direction at some books. But still, worth noting there is a 2.5 on the board, -110 both ways over at Caesar Sportsbook, I believe. Let's move over to Friday. You have two bets that you want to hit on here. Can't wait to get your handicap. Let's start off with the earlier one on Friday, looking at Vanderbilt against St. Mary's. 7 seed St. Mary's, both of these games in the East region. St. Mary's a 4.5-point favorite, total of 135.5. The Gales lost in the West Coast Conference championship game to Gonzaga, while Vanderbilt lost to the aforementioned Texas Longhorns in the first round of the SEC tournament. So what's your lean? Have you locked in a bet, or how are you looking to approach this game?
Yeah, so nothing locked in yet because I don't like to place anything until I'm completely gone through, crossed my I's, dotted my T's, all those things. I mean, it's the other way around, but you know what I mean. So these are things that, immediately jump off the page to me stylistically and matchup wise. And for me, St. Mary's and this is the exact same thing that happened last year. They had a really weak non-conference schedule. They came into WCC play at 9-6 and 49th in KenPom. Then they go on a 15-0 streak in the WCC. They end up losing to Gonzaga and winning the WCC tournament, entering March Madness at number 18 in KenPom. That's a 31-point jump through WCC play. What happens? They lose as a favorite to Grand Canyon. This year, they enter KenPom 45th. That's almost the exact same as last year, and they finished at 22nd. Also, almost the exact same thing. They went 17-1 in conference play. They had one 1-point loss in the regular season, lost a tight one at Gonzaga. And now, once again, they're the seed favorite and betting favorite against a pretty strong opponent. And I just feel like this is the exact same story. There's not a high ceiling with this St. Mary's squad. We know what they are and what they aren't. They don't turn the ball over, and they're unbelievable on the glass between Mitchell Saxon, Harry Wessels, and some of the forwards, Morauskas in particular. they will dominate the glass. They're the best team in the country at back taps. They're going to get second chances, but Vanderbilt just made it through an SEC gauntlet. I was fading Vanderbilt so hard early in the SEC season because they're the smallest team in the league by far. And
Doesn't that worry you though for this game? Doesn't that worry you though for this game?
It does, but SEC, they made it through the SEC at 8-10, and they fared much better against the spread later in the season. They proved that they can win games against physical offensive rebounding teams, and they can compete. It's not like, in fact, they went 6-2 when allowing a 36% offensive rebounding rate or higher. So teams grabbed offensive rebounds against them. It didn't change the fact that they can sort of withstand that offensive rebounding barrage with the way they play. More on that, they have two fantastic on-ball dribble creators in Jason Edwards and AJ Hoggard. A lot of people like to hate on AJ Hoggard, but he is really good in the pick and roll and against drop coverage, which is what St. Mary's basically exclusively plays. They're a rim denial drop coverage with Mitchell Saxon, and Jason Edwards is one of the very best dribble scorers in the entire country. And I think that people will look at that St. Mary's rebounding number. Oh, well, St. Mary's is 30th in height and Vanderbilt is 300th. Well, Vanderbilt just made it through nearly 500 in SEC play where teams are just as physical as St. Mary's. And they have the way higher ceiling because of their scoring pop. St. Mary's, outside of Mikey Lewis, who comes off their bench and is a freshman, can't play from behind and don't have a high ceiling. So when I think about that, I'm not going to let the rebounding dictate what I see throughout the rest of this matchup. Not to mention, I think St. Mary's is 15 to 20 spots too high in the market.
Yeah, all great points. I will say, too, to the point that we brought up in the Xavier Texas handicap, you don't want to look into a funnel, or you don't want to stare into a tunnel and funnel your results from conference tournament results. Because look at the WCC championship game where Gonzaga shoots 6.7% from behind the arc and they win the game. Now, St. Mary's didn't shoot it well either. They didn't hit one. Right, they didn't hit a single three in that game. My God.
1-0.
Right, exactly. It's wild. But Vanderbilt, conversely, also shot a very low percentage, under 16% against Texas, and a lot of those looks were open. So now St. Mary's does run you off the three-point line, and like you said, they protect the paint, they run that drop coverage. But Vanderbilt, I like your point. Maybe Tom Izzo doesn't necessarily want to agree because Michigan State is a hell of a lot better without AJ Hoggard on the roster, but he is really good against drop coverage. So I guess intuition-wise for me, it's hard to see Randy Bennett losing back-to-back first-round games. Like you said, they lost to Grand Canyon in the first round last year, but it is a 4.5-point spread.
Well, Mark Byington, Vanderbilt's coach, you already mentioned it. He out-schemed Wisconsin, and they won at James Madison last year. So he might also just be an awesome NCAA tournament coach.
Yeah, great point. One game, sample size, and in a one-and-done tournament, all those points are definitely worth touching on. So the last game, individual game we're going to handicap here before we get to our penciled-in Final Four picks. Can't wait to discuss that with you, Matt. Looking at Arizona, the 4 seed in the East region, taking on 13-seeded Akron. Point spread here. Speaking of teams that have flopped in the first round of the NCAA tournament before, or at least early on under Tommy Lloyd, the Arizona Wildcats are 13.5-point, 14.5-point favorites at some shops over the Akron Zips and John Gross. Total of 167.5. Where are you going here?
I'm going with Arizona, and I know that's not going to be a popular pick because of Tommy Lloyd's failure in the past, but what's worth mentioning, that Princeton first round loss was a 67-possession game that had 114 total points. Everyone was worried about Arizona against Long Beach last year, and I was on Arizona because Long Beach last year was 24th nationally in tempo. So Arizona played their style. It was a 78-possession game, and they won by 20. And this year, super speedy Arizona draws Akron, who's 16th in tempo. This is not going to be a team that will force Arizona into a super slow, gross game where maybe Caleb Love misses 9 threes and then they sneak away with the win. Akron needs to run, and this is going to be, like you said, that total is massively high. The projected total on KenPom in terms of pace is at 73. I think it's going to go well above that. And you as an Akron team that is nowhere near as talented and one of the smallest teams in the entire country, I may add, third smallest team in the entire country, their backcourt is 5'11 and 6 foot. They're going to get completely outsized, outboarded. And one other thing I want to mention, this is a fade on the MAC conference as well. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on Lamar, the basketball team that made it to the Southland Conference. You know, you don't really think about them. That's the second best defense Akron's played this year per KenPom. Number 2, 87th in the country. And number 1 was St. Mary's. They lost by 19 in a game that wasn't even close, and Akron never had the lead. Arizona's a much more offensively gifted team than St. Mary's and can play Akron's style better than they can. So I think Akron's inflated, much like St. Mary's in the WCC. Akron jumped 37 spots in MAC play in one of the worst defensive conferences I think we've ever seen. So I think Arizona scores 100 here. I might dabble on a team total, and I think that they win by 20.
I like your point about second chance opportunities, especially against an undersized Zips team, 361st in average height, according to KenPom. And I know it's not only Tommy Lloyd, it's Caleb Love and his, speaking of shooting variance, but this is one game. We're not talking about Arizona going to the Final Four with Caleb Love, even though he did do it, to his credit, with UNC a few years ago. But I'm with you. If I had to bet a side in this game, I would have to take Arizona. So without further ado, let's take a look. Quick picks, penciled in picks for the Final Four. Matt, I'll let you go first here. Swiftly looking at your 4 picks in your Final Four initial March Madness bracket.
For sure. I don't want to get too cute here, right? The best teams in the country have been really, 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 really good. Auburn has not played good basketball lately, but I think they have the easiest region, especially with Iowa State down Keyshawn Gilbert and Michigan State being, unable to shoot 3-pointers. I think they make it out of the South region. In the East region, Duke is my national title pick. I think they're the best team I've watched by a pretty wide margin. Alabama is unbelievably flawed with their defense. So I will take Duke in that region. Going to the Midwest, Houston with Jawan Roberts' injury question might be a popular upset pick somewhere along the way, along with their struggles in the tournament in past. But remember, before Jamal Shead went down, they were up on Duke and headed to a Final Four. I'm not convinced on Tennessee just as much as many are not convinced on Houston. I think that Houston makes it all the way. That's 3 1 seeds if you're counting at home, but I'm going to change it up slightly and go with number 3, Texas Tech in the West. Even though I'm a big Florida fan, I think Texas Tech, assuming they're fully healthy, gets a pretty good draw here because Florida and St. John's, the top 2 seeds in that region, are both extremely dependent on offensive rebounds for success offensively. And Texas Tech, with the fantastic Grant McCasland, who I think is one of the 5 best coaches in the country, is the best defensive rebounding team in the Big 12. They keep teams off of the offensive boards, and if they can do that to Florida and to St. John's with the way they shoot the 3, I think they're able to make it out of the region, and that's my one upset.
So we are, and this probably isn't good news, but we are 3 out of 4 aligned on our Final Four picks. I have a 35-40-1 ticket on Auburn to win it all. I didn't think I would take Auburn before this bracket came out to make the Final Four. A little bit concerned, not only with 3-point variance defensively, and they've had their fair share of positive 3-point variance throughout the season when you look at opponents' unguarded threes and inability to convert those. Now, obviously, that has a lot to do with Auburn's length, but also a little bit worried about Chad Baker-Mazara maybe getting ejected later in the tournament like we saw last year. But the one team that could do it for me in that region, it would have been a healthy Iowa State, but that's not the case anymore, as you said. Texas A&M, now they did it without, when you go back to the end of the regular season, that was one of Auburn's losses during that 3 out of 4 losing streak, or 3 losses in their Final 4 games heading into the tournament. That was on Texas A&M senior night, so keep that in mind.
Usually, and they shot the lights out in 3.
Right, exactly.
I watched that one, yeah.
Yeah, it was a great game for me because I had A&M against the spread and a little bit on the money line. And I will say A&M's not 3-point clip. If you want to look at the other way around, which I usually do, if teams are due for positive 3-point variance over the last month, A&M's not 3-point clip is the 9th worst in college basketball. And they have shooters. They don't have great shooters on paper with Wade Taylor and Zurich Phelps shooting around. I mean, Phelps in that Texas game, my God. But still, that's a team that, despite the fact they shot 31-ish% on the season, if they're shooting well from three against broom and drop coverage, like they did in that Auburn game, the only time they met in the regular season and all season, dominate the offensive glass. That's where Auburn can be had, not the best defensive rebounding team. But with that said, I think Auburn gets to the Final Four. I'm with you on Texas Tech, especially with Darion Williams and Chance McMillan healthy. I'm with you on Duke. Needless to say, Duke is going to get bounced now because everyone is picking Duke to win it all.
They're amazing. They're an NBA team. They'll make it.
And how, in a positive light for Duke, and I hate to say this, I hated Duke a lot more with Mike Krzyzewski. So
yeah, sure,
a little different with John Shire. He's from the local area for me in the suburbs of Chicago. So how could you not be a fan of Shire with that in mind, or at least from my perspective? But you could argue it's a benefit that they didn't play with Cooper Flagg for the majority of the ACC tournament, right?
Yeah, there's a world where that makes sense.
I mean, just from the notion that you get better by relying on more role players, assuming now that's with the caveat that Flagg will be back for at least the round of 32, and he looks like Cooper Flagg.
Yeah, I mean, with Duke, if one of Tyrese Proctor and Sion James is really good, I really do not think anyone can beat them. The way to beat Duke is both of them have to not be good. So the fact that they both had to take on a larger role offensively and on ball without Cooper Flagg is definitely valuable in terms of reps when it comes down the stretch.
The last Final Four pick I have to give to you. I want to double check because my mind is all over the place. Yes, in the Midwest region, so where Houston is the number 1 seed. I went very, very contrarian with this pick. And the best part about it is I can change it if they lose because it's a team in the first 4. A team we discussed earlier. Now, let's talk history for a second. 11 of the last 12 NCAA tournaments, there has been a seed, 7 seed or higher, to make the Final Four. And I think of all the regions, the Midwest is the most wide open. Would you at least agree with me from that standpoint?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay. I have a long shot bet going back to pre-Big East tournament on Xavier to make the Final Four. If they win the Texas game, I think either Illinois or Xavier could get to the Final Four. Is that crazy?
I think that Xavier, I already have pinpointed whoever beats Texas in the Texas Xavier game is going to beat Illinois.
So we're kind of in line, at least early on. And that's in Milwaukee. So you will get some home court advantage with maybe to an extent with Illinois, but also you'll get home court advantage, something we didn't discuss with Xavier in the first 4 game against Texas.
Dayton, yeah.
But you look at the lower part of the Midwest region. So let's say Xavier beats Illinois. You get a vulnerable Kentucky team, despite the fact that it seems like Lamont Butler is going to be back. The winner of UCLA, Utah State taking on Tennessee, Wofford. I think that, and then if Houston, if Juwan Roberts, that health issue carries on into the tournament, maybe Gonzaga gets to the Elite Eight. I'm just throwing out scenarios, but again, it goes back to the notion that that region to me is the most wide open, so I'm comfortable with taking a long shot.
It's funny because you mentioned, you plugged the beginning, I'm doing Majeski's article, and I'm doing that region, and yeah, there's no clear favorite outside of my one thing there is with Houston, and I picked them to go to the Final Four. The notion is that Houston doesn't do well in the NCAA tournament, and the reality is Houston had good teams for all of Kelvin Sampson's tenure until last year when they had a great one, and this year when they had a great one. And I can't get out of my head that Houston was rolling against Duke at halftime until Jamal Shed got hurt right at that half and then completely blew that game. And who knows, maybe they're national champions right now. I mean, I don't know if they beat UConn, but you never know. And I just can't shake the fact that elite Houston Kelvin Sampson teams get a rep that I'm not sure they deserve. And I'm kind of, although I respect the contrarian position, and there probably is going to be something that breaks my relatively chalk, I don't know if Houston is the right team to fade outside of the Final Four.
So if you were to take a long shot in any of these regions, off the top of your head, and if you don't have one right now, that's totally fine. It's Sunday night.
Something.
It's almost midnight for you on the East Coast, so your brain might be fried at this point.
No, for sure. Okay, well, let's keep it in that region. Let's get wild, at least to the Elite Eight, because they're not in Houston's half of the bracket. Why not Utah State? Everyone's picking Utah State to beat UCLA, and I've got to dive into that one a little further, but Utah State's zone means that if you can't hit threes, you're not going to beat them. And with UCLA and Tennessee, you have two teams that don't get a lot of three-point production outside of a couple of players. They would probably need Kentucky to get beat before they play them, because I think Kentucky would absolutely murder a zone. But considering they're getting Illinois or Xavier before that, it's very possible, not to mention Troy will be at least a little bit of a challenge. If Utah State can avoid Kentucky, the way their super unique defense and the way that they can play offensively, they have a chance to get to the Elite Eight at minimum.
So let's throw a couple long shots down. Best price on Utah State to make the Final Four is plus, so 140 to 1 over at FanDuel, and Xavier is 110 to 1 over at FanDuel. So throw couch change down. I mean, I threw a very, very small bet, like half of so 0.05 units down. Very, very small bet on Xavier to make the Final Four before the Big East tournament. Are you going to do that with Utah State?
I probably will have to do that, but more valuable than money, I would clip this podcast, share it everywhere, and feel really smart.
And then when they lose in the first round, you unshare the clip, right?
I mean, at least I don't have a first four team, because that's even worse.
That's true, but thankfully, because of the way brackets work, if Xavier was to lose, you could change it. I could change it before I even get to the first round of the tournament.
Not checkers.
Exactly.
You got it.
Maybe you'll see me change my pick in my article if Xavier loses on Wednesday night. But really fun podcast. He is Matthew Winick at Matthew Winick on X. Be sure to check out his write-ups in Jordan Majeski's betting preview. Majeski, a great college basketball handicapper as well. Matt, any last words before you get out of here?
Thanks for having me on. It's always great to talk shop, and let's enjoy these last few weeks before we have to put the college basketball mind into the rear view for a few months. Love
it. Head over to play.thelines.com if you want to predict the final 16 teams in the field. You'll be entered to win $1,000 if you predict the perfect Sweet 16. Best sportsbook promos also available over at thelines.com. Use promo code THELINES if you're in Illinois. One word to get $5. Bet $5 and you get $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's over at Bet365 Sportsbook using promo code THELINES. Bet365 just launched in Illinois and Tennessee. You can find all of our bets from our staff in our Discord channel. Link is over at thelines.com in the top right-hand corner. For Matt, I'm Eli Hershkovich. Thanks for watching and listening to our first March Madness preview here on Sunday night, Monday morning. So long, everybody, and good luck with your March Madness bets.